Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to tell you guys about what happened this past weekend. So let's talk about Rosh Hashanah first. Everybody knows it's a Judaic tradition. The New Year isn't 2 days long, and it also isn't on the seventh month of the year. And it's also not during a month called Elul. So what we know about Yahweh's months and his calendar is he doesn't name his days and weeks and months. He just expects us to count. That's it. They're not named until after the Babylonian exile. And I think I talked about this actually with one of the gals who was part of some family that I was fellowshipping with. Very well versed in Torah and Tanakh, sounded like a sage, was highly impressive to me. She was probably about 20 years old, and she had a lot of wisdom and understanding. I was like, did I meet my match or something? I mean, honestly, I was a bit scared and felt a bit humbled at the same time. But anyways, so Rosh Hashanah, there's this tradition for that where the rabbis believe that God will come down in some sort of bodily form and administrate rule and dwell among the people, as if that isn't anthropomorphizing God, like they constantly accuse the Christian polemicists of. So there's a Talmudic tractate, right, that talks about Genesis chapter 1 and God saying, let us make man in our image. Well, if you look at it truly, the rabbis admit that they changed it to let me make man in my image into singular form so that there wouldn't be a plural form of God. So as you can see from evidence in Tractate Megillah 9a, the rabbis had these edits made, and it was so that one would not mistakenly conclude that there are multiple powers at play in creation and that God has a human form. And they've also gone with reading from the Masoretic text instead of the Septuagint text, even though the Septuagint text is directly translated from the Hebrew to the Greek, because the Greek translations are used by Paul in his letters to promote Yeshua or Jesus as deity. And that's one thing that some of these members of this family didn't quite understand or comprehend yet. And we understand that this is a very controversial thing to consider within the Messianic movement, but it has to be brought up and discussed. So I would consider this family a part of a remnant of a remnant. I mean, they're artisans. I'm an academic. I can quote rabbinic tradition. Like, I can tell you why Jews eat honey and apples for Rosh Hashanah, right? It's because they want to revel in the glory of the creation, right? How sweet is it that God created the earth? Those are the things that we're supposed to be doing on the Sabbath, technically. And that's where I erred in some of my discussion with this family, is I did deviate away a little bit on topics that were not relevant necessarily to scripture. And we sort of had to pull back in the conversation. So it's funny because I was in error a bit there. And this family, they knew so much about the Bible. They also were into gardening, natural remedies and medicines. And their daughters are very traditional, and they have a good understanding of what the role of a woman is and how she's to provide and take care of a home. And a man is to provide monetarily, but a woman is to provide the way to make a house a home. And so really, there was a total homemaker mentality there. And so, of course, when you come across somebody who's Proverbs 31, or a group of people who resemble Proverbs 31, and they're doing all the things like making their own food at home and doing arts and crafts and selling leather wallets and selling tote bags and garments and making their own garments and wearing head coverings, you're just like, wow. I mean, we can do so much more for Messiah Yeshua, and we can also learn things that are a lot more relevant to our lives. And I realized that my academics, like, yeah, that's good. That's going to help people as I shepherd potentially in a community. But as far as like the artists and stuff, I really need to pick up on, doing a garden outside. Well, when Yahweh created Adam, he made him husband to Eve, right? And the word husband is similar to the word husbandry, which refers to cultivation. So when you're into husbandry, you're watching over plants, you're making sure plants grow, you're making sure you have a good garden, you're making sure you're taking care of your garden. And what did Yahweh tell Adam to do first? He said, you are to tend this garden and take care of it. Tend to this garden and take care of it. So just that revelation really opened up so many things, right? A wife as a homemaker, a husband as a priest and as a provider, and somebody who also knows how to garden. My point is if you're artisan, the last thing you care about is what the rabbis have to say about the Bible. And the funny thing about all this is when you meet somebody who's Proverbs 31, or you try to think of somebody who's Proverbs 31, especially us men, and you have this biological response to that, you're first thinking, well, what kinds of sacrifices can I make for that woman? How can I beef myself up enough, and how can I pray and fast enough so that I can be qualified to be a husband to that kind of a woman? And, then it kicks in the thoughts of, well, how much more can I do for our husband Yeshua? How much more can I do in a servile position of sacrifice? Because it seems like we're not really standing up for Yahweh and Yeshua, but we are standing him up. That's what we're doing. We're not standing up for him, we're standing him up. Like, we are actively rebelling against his laws, we're actively rebelling against what he says. And I happen to be doing so inadvertently on that day, just out of my flesh. Oh, and I guess even less of a reason to care about all the Talmudic traditions and trying to be all scholastic in it is that I heard a rabbi say something to the tune of, he doesn't believe in the Brit Hadashah because it has narrative in it. He doesn't believe in the New Testament because it has stories in it, and the Tanakh does not need a sequel of stories. Well, Rabbi, I'm afraid to tell you that the Talmud, a lot of it is narrative. A lot of it is a bunch of different stories. I mean, yes, some fake accounts, obviously, but that serve as a sequel to the Tanakh. So it's not okay if it's the New Testament being a sequel, but it's definitely okay if it's the Talmudic documents. And for those of you who are out there, I would say that the majority cannot handle the level of conversation and the type of frequency that we were operating on. I mean, all of us, that family, me, my friends that were there at that fellowship, one of the girls actually mentioned to me, this was their eldest daughter, Mia ton sabaton. And she said, do you know what that is? So this is a Greek phrase. And I said, yes, I know exactly what that is. You're referring to Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. And people were like, how did he point out that verse directly? She spoke to him in Greek, not English. And I'm not even a Greek scholar yet, so I was even surprised that I caught on to that. And in Acts 27, we read about the disciples eating bread allegedly on the first day of the week. And there's a scholarly debate over whether this can be read as the first day of the week or the first of Sabbaths, like a count towards Shavuot rather than a count towards the weekly Sabbath. So really interesting arguments go around it, but in my personal view, the proper exegesis of that passage would be to look at that as the Sabbath. Because why would Luke emphasize the Sabbaths and the feast days all throughout the narrative and then just do this one little deviation on a day that isn't really that important? Because a Sunday doesn't really serve in scripture, because you don't really read about people congregating in synagogues on a Sunday. But we do hear of people congregating in synagogues on Shabbat, and there they read the Torah portion. And the only problem, though, with the Torah portion is, while I love it, it's a great concept, we should definitely keep it going, people have adopted this idea that all they have to do for the weekly reading of Scripture is just look at the Torah portion and they're done. They understand Yahweh, they understand the Scriptures. Folks, I'm not making this up. People just want to read that and think that they're good. And, this tradition came out of 6th century BCE, Babylon. Okay, so in this time period at this place, because the Jews wanted to preserve their culture, and understandably so. And it was a great way to preserve the culture. It was a great way to hold people accountable to some minimum amount of reading. You have to set a bar, right? But that's a low bar. Once we're all in a free country like America and we have access to the Bible, we have access to Torah and Tanakh, we can do a lot more than just read a little parashah. Even if we have jobs, even if we're working, I'm somebody who considers myself a busy man. And we also talked about, at least this gal and I and a couple other people, about GMO, genetic splicing, and, cutting genes and basically putting them into different plants, and what the biblical prohibitions or allowances are surrounding that. And we know that there's a specific verse in Scripture that talks about not mixing seed, not mixing animals, and, of course, different things like that, not mixing garments. So I want to get to some more of that in the next video, but this was just an awesome experience.